Edward Grimm lived alone. He had a quiet life, one, for the most part, of solitude. He would wake up in the morning, check the news for a while making his morning coffee, grab some fruit for breakfast, and head off to work. At work, he was amicable with all of his coworkers, and even his boss. They all liked Edward, and for the most part, Edward didn't mind them either. He rarely spent any time with them after work, though. Edward was just one of those people that his coworkers simply forgot about. It wasn't personal. It's just how it was. Edward would leave promptly at 5 p.m. to go back home. He would arrive home, sort through his mail, take care of any small items that needed to be done around the house, and then have dinner. Sometimes he would cook, and other times he would order out. After dinner, Edward would typically go on a jog around his neighborhood. He found it somewhat relaxing to jog. He would see the houses of his neighbors, a few of them outside walking their dogs, playing with their kids, or enjoying a romantic walk. Edward was amicable with all of his neighbors, frequently waving at them and smiling. They would wave back and smile too. The neighbors liked Edward, although they almost never associated with him outside of a quick wave or hello. Edward was just one of those people that everyone seemed to forget about. It wasn't personal. It's just how it was. Edward would typically be in bed by 10:45 p.m. each night, and sound asleep by 11. The following morning, Edward awoke to the sound of his alarm clock going off, as it did every morning. His wife Evelyn put her hand on his shoulder. "You're going to be late for work." "We both are." From the next room, the sounds of a baby crying began to echo through the halls. "Now the kid is up." His wife kissed him on the cheek as she sprung out of bed. "I'll drop him off at the daycare today." Edward sat up in bed and nodded. Evelyn noticed his blank expression. "What's wrong?" Edward looked at her and simply said, "Strange dream," and proceeded to leave the bed and get ready for work. Edward was friends with many people at work, and they would frequently go out for drinks afterwards, socializing and laughing. In the eyes of his coworkers, Edward was a fun guy to have around. It simply wasn't the same if he wasn't there. Edward returned home that evening to his wife, who had ordered takeout for them. They talked about their day and laughed, every once in a while one of them having to get up and tend to Junior, who was asleep the next room over. After dinner, Edward, Evelyn, and Junior took a walk around the block. They saw, greeted, and waved at many of the neighbors. Many of their neighbors they would frequently have over for dinner, or inversely be invited over for dinner. Edward and Evelyn were a wonderful couple, and to the neighbors, a dinner party was always more fun when they were around. After putting Junior to bed, Edward and Evelyn would usually stay up and watch some TV together, until about 11:15, after which they would both drift off to sleep. Edward awoke the next morning to the sound of his alarm clock. He turned it off and sat up in bed. "What a strange dream," he said aloud, to no one. He got ready for work, checked the news, made his morning coffee, grabbed some fruit for breakfast, and was out the door. He was friendly to his coworkers as always, but now he wondered, Why was it that he never socialized with them after work? What was it about him that made him so forgettable? He returned home that evening and ate dinner. His home seemed more quiet than usual, too. Darker than usual. He went for his evening jog, and as always, exchanged brief pleasantries with the neighbors. But he began to wonder. What was it about him that made them not want to invite him to dinner parties? Why did they all seem to forget he existed? Edward was in bed by 10:45 that evening, and fast asleep by 11. The next morning, Edward woke up before his alarm. He was sitting in bed, which startled Evelyn a little when she opened her eyes. "What's going on?" she asked. "I had such a strange dream. I can't even describe it. It was like I was somewhere else." She patted his back. "Well, you're here now, and you're going to be late for work if you don't get out of bed." Edward went through his daily routine happily. However, in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake that strange dream he'd had the night before. When it came time to sleep again, he was almost nervous. Evelyn seemed to sense his anxiety and gave him a kiss on his forehead before telling him good night and falling asleep herself. Edward closed his eyes and was fast asleep by 11:15. Edward woke up alone in his room, his mind and heart racing from the vivid dream he just had. As he robotically floated through his daily routine, Edward couldn't help but long for that other life, the one in the dream. He had felt unfulfilled before, but until now he didn't realize that he was actually unhappy. Desperate to see what his dream life would be like tonight, Edward was in bed by 9:30 and fast asleep by 10. The next morning, Edward and Evelyn both woke up at almost the exact same time. Evelyn turned to him. "Did you have the dream again?" "I did," Edward replied. "It was awful." "Well, it was only a dream." Evelyn smiled at him. That day was as good as any other for Edward, right up until it was time to go to sleep. He sat up anxiously in bed. Evelyn put her arms around him. "Worried about the dream?" Edward nodded. She came closer to his ear and said, almost in a whisper, "Just make the choice to stay here, with me, and you won't have that dream anymore." She kissed his forehead and went to sleep. Edward put his head on his pillow. "Make the choice to stay," he thought to himself. "Make the choice to stay." Edward closed his eyes. The alarm buzzed, signaling the end of his slumber. Edward opened his eyes. Evelyn was smiling at him. "Morning, sleepyhead." I watched in horror from my hiding place as the aliens slaughtered my people. Someday I will find this Earth place that they come from and destroy them all. "I've missed you so much," I whispered as she removed her clothes to take a shower. Watching her through the binoculars was painful, but at least I'd found out where her new house was. I wish I hadn't tried to put my cat down. He only responded by saying,